Well, guess what, folks? It is winter. The snowflakes are flying, there's snow on the ground, it's cold, and it's only gonna get colder. It's the reality of living in the northern hemisphere that you have to put up with a few months of cold winter weather. Unless, of course, you cheat. You go to, like here, they go down to Florida or Arizona. I don't know, in Europe, I guess you go to like, what, Spain or Africa? I'd love to go to all of those places. However, I am in New Brunswick. And I'm not camping right now. I'm in dry dock, but I try to camp as much as possible. I camp at least several months of the year. I don't camp every day, but I camp as much as I can. And seasons are not going to stop me. So the reason I'm in dry dock right now is to prepare my camper for the winter. And I did get a good start. I got the foam underneath the floor, so the floor is going to be a little warmer this winter. But there's one major thing that I have to contend with, and I seem to contend with it every year for over 7 years, is how am I going to heat my camper in the winter? Well, most people know that when you buy a small camper like this, especially if you live in a northern climate, you'll already have an onboard heater. And this particular one has a propane furnace. Propane is stored right up front, and it works well. It does keep my trailer warm. However, in the winter time, it's a little bit more of a challenge. And the reason being, it's not the fuel it consumes, it's the amount of electricity. Because I tend to camp off-grid and for longer periods of time. I can only use the electricity I can produce. And I produce my electricity from these 2 solar panels. So I was looking for something that wasn't just such a pig on electricity. Now, what's the problem with this propane furnace in the first place? First of all, current draw. It uses far too much. Secondly, it cycles on and off and on and off. However long you have it and you're using it, if it gets colder, it just keeps cycling. Drives me crazy. I'm crazy as it is. I'd like to be a crazy person that at least gets some sleep at night. But the worst thing is when it's quiet, maybe you're in the middle of the night, you're asleep, and it decides to turn itself on. This is what it sounds like. Not exactly a lullaby. It uses at least 35, maybe 40 watts of power every time it's on. Now, I'm on the grid right now, like I'm parked, and I've got an extension cord to a 120 outlet. So I'm fine now. I can do so many things, but when I'm really camping, I'm off the grid, so I don't have these luxuries. But when I am on the grid, I've got to take advantage of it. So right now, I'm not using this onboard heater. I'm just very simply using a ceramic heater, like the kind you pick up at Walmart, 120 volt, 1500 watts. It will heat a little trailer like this. But because it's 1500 watts, it's no good for off-grid camping. So what are my other alternatives? Well, and the other thing that I should mention, I forgot to mention, that I do not want a heater that puts moisture in the air. Like the Mr. Heater Buddy.
I once did a video on the Buddy for winter camping. Although it's quiet, reasonably priced, and uses no electricity, it consumes just as much fuel as my onboard propane furnace. But its biggest drawback was that its open flame concept with no venting meant the heat came with lots of moisture. Not good.
The propane is combusting directly into the air, and the byproduct of combustion is not only heat, it's water. It makes the inside of your trailer soaking wet. And if you can't dry it out, you can't if it's minus 20 out. You can't just open all the windows. You'll lose all your heat. It is a problem. So I do not want any kind of system that puts moisture in the air. And I know the people that use the Olympia Wave, sorry, It's efficient, but it still puts moisture in the air. Speaking of moisture, you might have noticed this little guy here. It's a ProBreeze dehumidifier. It's just a little one, a tiny little thing. They're not expensive. They're about $60. I think I got this off Amazon. And you can see underneath, that's where the water goes, and I'll just shake that. I think you can see the water in there. It's perfect for a little camper like this. I can't use it off the grid because it uses too much electricity, but when I'm plugged in, this is perfect. It's really quiet. You know, it's just a gentle purr, but it'll fill that up in about, you know, maybe 3 or 4 days. Like right now, it's about maybe a quarter full. You can see the water there, and it shuts off when it's full, so you don't have to worry about it. Leave that running when the trailer is not being used, and it'll stay dry and fresh in here. So, back to the heater issue. What is the best choice now? Now, I had brought this question up many, many times to my viewers, and I got a lot of recommendations. And the two that most people said, like the top two, were the Dickinson P9000 and the Propex HX2000. Now, I looked into both of these. They're both very expensive, which I have to take in consideration because I am on a budget. I'm not going to spend a lot of money, especially at over $1,000 in at least one of these cases, for something I'm only going to use maybe a quarter of the year. So I looked into these, and they do seem efficient. That's the good news. They do seem reasonably quiet. And the Dickinson P9000, I believe you can regulate the flow of propane, so you can have it just low, which is what I want, because I don't want it to be 70 degrees or 20 degrees Celsius all the time. I want it to just be above freezing. That's fine with me. The problem with the Dickinson is it has to vent out, and it has to vent out vertically. And that means I'd have to put a hole in my roof. I really don't want to do that. As far as the Propex HS2000 goes, well, there's one thing I'm not crazy about, well, including the price, is that it only has one speed. It's either on or off. It's regulated by a thermostat, and that's the ones that I'm really trying to avoid, you know, on, off, on, off. They didn't seem to have any way of controlling the amount of propane. They're okay for consumption. I think 1 pound of propane, I think they claim 3 hours, which is pretty good. But they do use electricity as well, and when they're on, about 17 watts. What I was looking for is something that would heat my trailer, at least keep it above freezing, but not demand a lot of electricity. That is why I wanted to try a diesel heater. I started an experiment with a parking heater for my fiberglass trailer. And initially it showed a lot of promise, but things just didn't go as smoothly as planned. I wasn't really using it for its intended purpose, and that's important. I wanted something portable, I wanted something temporary, and that's why I tried this particular heater. And it's hooked up inside. I've got it hooked up to my Jackery, and I've got it at 100% charge right now. You don't need a lot of diesel. That's the good news. But the bad news is, I don't know. I don't like diesel. Every time I tried to pour it, I would spill it. If it ever shuts down, yes, you do get the stink of diesel in the trailer. Not a lot. I've got mixed feelings on whether or not I would actually recommend it. And I'm really getting cold. I gotta put my gloves back on. For somebody that's willing to experiment, it's okay.
Now, I do admit that setting it up outside made things more complicated, but its shortcomings convinced me that it was not worth installing indoors either.
So here's the bad news.
It just wasn't for me.
Now, another alternative that I had, and I tried a few times, was a wood stove. More specifically, a pellet stove. Now, isn't that cool? No electricity needed. It generates its own from the heat. Unlike the propane furnace and the diesel heater, which actually consume electricity, this one actually generates it. It's a little stove that could, and it did. Well, here it is, the little stove that could, and it did. It kept me warm several winters. I'm really proud of it because I made it myself. I had no guide or anything like that, and it worked fantastically. But why did I never make it a permanent installation? And one reason's pretty obvious. It's when you make something homemade and you bring it into your camper, there's a certain amount of risk, and in this there would be a lot of risk. Nobody, no regulatory body would approve this, and I could see some warden knocking on my door looking on this and say, shut it down. There is a risk, and I'd have to buy a commercial product in reality to make it work for this camper. But the second reason was more about the fuel. Now, the nice thing about this is it could burn almost anything. In an emergency situation, you could always find something to burn in a wood stove. However, with my personal philosophy is when I'm out traveling, especially when I'm out in the woods, I leave no trace and I also take nothing. And I was not comfortable when I go out into the travel, especially in a national park or somewhere away from where I live. I didn't want to start cutting down trees or even harvesting dead wood. I would have to bring the wood with me or buy it. I would have to store it, and let's face it, this does take a considerable amount of fuel. Even this small little thing, when I was using the pellets, and the pellets I had to have, a big bucket to take with me, it just wasn't practical. As much as I love it, as much as I think it was great as a temporary little bit of warmth, it wasn't the final answer. And when it got down to it, I liked the fact that I made it work, but the big attraction for me was that soothing flame. If I could just get that, I'd have exactly what I wanted. But looking back in the stove and the heating experiment so far, what would I recommend? It's going to be something different for everybody. Certainly, an onboard propane furnace is the most reliable. Diesel, to me, it was the most annoying. And wood stove, it's certainly the most soothing, but it's also the most dangerous. So now I've thought long and hard about this, and I really did my research. In a perfect world, I'd find something really inexpensive, maybe even something I could make myself, which was safe and it wouldn't affect the insurance or anything else. And you know what? I just couldn't find it. There are no guarantees, and not only that, even if I did come up with something I made myself, what's going to happen when I present it to you and somebody tries it and they make a mistake and they burn up their trailer? Well, I'd be responsible for that, so I'm not going to do it. It had to be a commercially available product. It had to fit within the confines of this small trailer. It had to be low on fuel consumption and low on how much electricity it needed. It was not going to produce moisture inside my trailer. And that final requisite, that it be within my budget. Now, I had to go back and revisit what I'd already talked about, because at the beginning of this video, I said that this trailer already had an onboard furnace. Why don't I just simply switch it out to something that was more efficient and quieter? So I phoned Trillium up to see what they're using these days on their Outbacks, because this one's older, and it turns out that they did get rid of the noisy furnaces. They've got something completely different. They now use Dometics, and I have heard the Dometics before. They are quieter, and it would sort of be a simple switch out. Same footprint, same location. Seemed like a good compromise, so I asked, well, how much is it going to cost? And that's when I figured out, of all the things that I require, I have to make a compromise, and that compromise is going to have to be budget. I just can't find something at a real low cost that's going to be quality and that's going to last. You know, I'm going to be doing this every year unless I bite the bullet and spend more money. Now, the Dometics were about $1,400 Canadian, which is about $1,100 US plus installation. So I looked into it, and although I was happy with how quiet it was, one thing I wasn't really crazy about is that it still uses a lot of electricity. It used about 35 watts when in operation. And so, but now that I've changed, now that I've said, okay, well, I'm willing to spend a little bit more money, it gave me an opportunity to go back and revisit what some people had suggested and what I did my research on. And it turns out there was one heater that was quite outstanding, and that's this one. I got it upside down just to fool you. Here it is, the Dickinson P9000. It is 14 inches high by 8.5 inches wide by 5.5 inches deep. Weighs 15 pounds. It has a 2.5 inch OD double wall flue. And the fuel consumption, this is very important, 5 to 7 hours per pound. That is really good. That means 1 pound of propane can last 7 hours. It can last the whole night.
But its most outstanding feature to me was its power consumption. To run the fan, it only used a mere 0.17 amps, which is about 2 watts.
Heat output, 3,200 BTU to 4,500 BTU. That's not bad. That is in the low range. I know there's a lot of onboard heaters, furnaces that are probably closer to like the 10 and 15,000 BTU range. But in a small camper like this, you really don't need that. You know, even if it's like 20 below, as long as you've got good insulation, you should be fine. So we have the instruction manual, which I will read before I do anything. Okay, there's another box here. Okay. Oh, dinner bell. Right on. Okay, here we go. Get this out here so I won't cut myself. Upside down. Yep. Here it is. The Dickinson P9000. So now you know. This hopefully is going to be the best little heater for this camper. I won't know until I install it, but I got it. That's a start. Now I know some of you really hope to see how well this performs, but it's going to take me a while to set up, and I still have some parts that haven't arrived yet. It's the holiday season, everything's delayed, so in the new year, I'm sure to give you a performance rating on it. This is my Christmas present to myself. I got a new toy. Woohoo! I hope you enjoyed this video. Check out my others as well.
So please stay tuned for updates as I progress through the installation and testing.
Almost makes me forget that it's snowing outside.
In the meantime, stay warm out there.